Welcome back. And on today's episode, we're talking about the red flags you should look out for if you are trying to hire an accountant. Now, we're going to talk about a business owner named Lisa. Lisa sent in some questions, and there were some things she had some concerns about with this potential accountant. And we're going to tell her, hey, here are the 5 red flags you should look out for, and stay tuned for today's tax tea. So welcome back, and I want to welcome on the co-host Lola. Welcome back.
Hello. Happy to be here. Welcome to our audience to another episode of Stuff Your Accountant Isn't Telling You. I'm very happy to be here.
Absolutely. Now, this one is an important topic because I see more and more people, asking questions about this or having concerns about this. And recently, I shared a post on LinkedIn, and I talked about how, I'm trying to think of a nice way to say it. To me, it seems like a shady practice. It just seems like a shady practice where there are some accounting firms that advertise that they do CFO services or that they do advisory services.
Okay.
And then, let's say a month, 2 months, 3 months later, I'm talking to their client, like their client calls in because maybe they're part of the small business CFO community, and they start asking questions. And I realize, like, what you're getting is not CFO services. Like, they sold that to you, but what you're getting is just glorified bookkeeping. And I'm just like, you know what? People need to understand what are the red flags you should look out for when it comes down to your relationship with your accountant. So I'm excited about hopping into this topic because I think it's so useful for people. I mean, I guess, have you seen people, getting into relationships with an accountant and it's just not turning out to go well in their favor?
Yeah, absolutely. I think more recently, I had a situation where I was transitioning or working to transition with an existing client. We did some project work for them, and we were trying to get their financials from last year. I guess now would be the year before, cleaned up, to get them working with a new firm that did kind of like, it was a company that did a combination of services, accounting services, and they offered like property management, plus they had like an accountant and bookkeeper on their staff. And so, I was working with them to transition the bookkeeping, make sure they had everything that they needed to be able to take that over. And within 2 months of basically, I don't even think it was a month. Within a month of them working with this new person, the business owner came back to me and was like, yeah, no, this relationship isn't working. And I was like, dang, what happened? Like that was really quick. And so right now, I think this episode is so timely, not just for Lisa, but I think also because currently she is actually trying to find a new accountant because just based on where their business is, we can't support them right now. But at the end of the day, I mean, you see this every day, right? Where people get into a relationship with an accountant or a company that says they offer accounting services. And sometimes it's situations where they are like, for example, in this case, a property management company that just happens to have an accountant on site. And so the question is, okay, is this accountant the accountant for the business, the property management business, or is this person the accountant that's going to actually process the transactions related to my company? And I think there's a lot of that where, things are processed kind of in a bundle, but I mean, this is someone's life. Like, you can't be playing games like that. So I've seen those situations, and that example is one that I've actually seen more recently.
Absolutely. So, let's just jump right into it. I think with, the first red flag number one, from my perspective, I think red flag number one is when you're talking to an accountant and the accountant is spending more time talking about themselves and their own accomplishments. And it's like, when you think back on the conversation, if that's where they spent most of their time on, is talking about themselves and their accomplishments, I think that is a red flag. Now, that's my number one. Do you have any thoughts or perspective on that?
I certainly think that is a red flag. I guess in Lisa's case, she's wanting to make sure she makes the right decision about hiring the right person. And I think the reason why this one is I would agree with this one as being a red flag, is because I think it really kind of helps you gauge the person's interest in you. Like, are they really interested in knowing about your business? Are they really interested in understanding kind of, because for me, when I go to conversations, my first initial conversation is just to understand, just to get to know you. Because in that conversation, it's not just getting to know you, but do we even have a chemistry? Like, I know that sounds like a relationship, but like, would we work well together? What are your, what are your pain points? What is it that you're looking for help with? Why do you even need an accountant? Right. But if I spend all the time trying to sell you, or majority of the time trying to sell you on like why I'm this amazing firm, and then we get to the end of it and it's like, oh, okay, so what did you need? Because I think another thing also that I think is really great, and I've advised people to do this, is if you just focus on talking about how amazing you are without really understanding the customer's problem, and this is, I think, for any business, you run into a situation where what happens is you're basically doing information overload, and that information is going over the head of the potential client, and there's really no way, you don't know if you're connecting with them or if you're not. Whereas if you spend time, and you shouldn't be doing it for this reason, but if you spend time actually listening and asking questions to figure out what it is that they want, what happens then at that point is you can then say, okay, based on your problem and based on you telling me what's going on, these are the solutions I have that can fix the problem, and you can focus specifically on that. So I think that's a big one. Is that something that you've seen a lot, where people kind of make, don't make those connections and don't connect those dots, Terrell?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've seen this a lot where talking to different, business owners and talking to different accounting firms, where it's just like this sense of if you have to spend that much time talking about yourself, it's just like, you know, you're really trying to sell yourself. And I get it, because there is this element of, hey, if this is the first time I'm having a conversation with you, I
Right.
need to tell you a little bit about me. But I don't want to dominate the conversation, because one of the things that I always say, and I tell, when I hop on a sales call with, a potential client, and they're asking us about our bookkeeping and accounting services, is like, I can tell you about what we do, but that's only part of the equation, because if we're looking to establish a business relationship, I got to understand, are you the right fit for us?
Right.
Because if I'm just spending all my time trying to sell you on who we are, but I'm not evaluating you as well, because you might not be a good fit, then I would
Exactly.
say is that, you know what, I'm probably not setting this up to be a mutually beneficial relationship. And so I would tell Lisa is, in your conversation with the potential accountant, the people that you are interviewing, if they are spending all of their time talking about themselves, and that you don't see that kind of change, then I would say is that's probably red flag number one. Now, I'll go on to red flag number two is, now this one I will say is, when you think about it, it can be something that people just kind of overlook, or they don't think that much about, but I think it is a big deal. Is if you're talking to a potential accountant and they're spending their time in the conversation with you talking bad about other accountants or talking bad
Oh,
about other clients. What's your thoughts
oh,
on that?
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a character flaw. That's not even like business. For me, that's a character issue, because I don't care what happens. That's a no-no for me. Like, because I think it's just even if you take the whole character out of it, you just don't know like who this person knows. It's such a small, like, accounting is such a small community, as much as like there's a lot of accountants, but a lot of people know each other. And so I think is you can, and this is something that I've learned, and this is more on the philosophical side, is one thing that my father always said is like, don't attack people, attack the problem. So like if there is an issue where, hey, this is a problem that this accountant wasn't full, like this is a problem that this accountant had or this firm had, if they're leaving or whatever they're doing, is focus on, okay, this is the problem they had. How can I help you solve it? I think you can do that, and you can address that without speaking ill of somebody, or speaking ill of another individual, or speaking ill of your own customers or your former customers. Because for me, if you need to do that to sell what you're doing, that's a problem. You should be able to assess the value that you bring to your potential client without downplaying someone else. Thoughts?
Absolutely. I mean, I totally agree. I mean, I think that when it comes down to an accountant who spends their time talking bad about other accountants, to me, what that tells me is one is they aren't the, I guess you say, I agree with the character piece, but what it tells me is also that, you know what, I could be the next person that they talk bad about. Like, you know, because
Yeah.
if I'm thinking about, you know what, this is going to be a person who is going to see, you know, some of the area of my business that I'm probably the most vulnerable in, which is
Yeah,
the money side of my business. Well,
exactly.
if they're talking bad about, you know, other accountants, or let's say if they did a review and they noticed a problem that my previous accountant had, if they're just trashing that other accountant, it's like, I can imagine what they might say about me when they see some of the things that, you know, that are going on in my business, or some areas that I need to work on. Because
Yeah.
it never fails. Every client that we work with, there is always something where, you know, the client doesn't quite have the best processes in place about, you know, let's say depositing cash
Yeah.
when clients pay with cash, or they don't have the best processes about transferring money, or whether they use their personal account versus their business account, where, you know, there's just some areas where, like I said, accounting is not their full-time job, so there's some processes that aren't the best. And it's like, you don't want to work with someone who you think is going to constantly judge you for your behavior and your actions and stuff like that. So I would say is, if they're talking bad about other people, it's probably a likelihood that they could eventually be talking bad about you to other people. So I would
Yeah.
say is just, you know, keep the drama low and stay away from it.
I fully agree. One thing I want to say before we move on to the next red flag is, you know how they talk about like how in sometimes, and again, I went to my last 2 years of in America, or my last 2 years of high school were in America, and they would talk about how like the the ugliest girl in the room or whatever, the person that had like low self-esteem was often the person that like attacked other people. And so for me, how I translate that into this conversation is, for an accountant, if you're spending a lot of your time backbiting another accountant, or you are talking bad about a client that you had, on especially on the accountant side, like that's a reflection on you and your lack of confidence on what you can bring to the table, because you don't need to diminish somebody else to show the client and the potential client that you have value. And I think that's important because, like you said, it's very this is a part that a lot of business owners are vulnerable with. And what we do is so much about trust. And if you broke the trust of a client by sharing stuff about them or speaking bad about them, but like you said, Terrell, like you can do the same thing to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think your analogy is great. I mean, and we'll probably even use that analogy a little bit more in some of the next ones. So the third red flag was that they don't ask about your goals and your objectives. So, I mean, picture this: Lisa, you're the business owner, and you're trying to hire someone to help you in an area of your business, but they're not even asking questions or even thinking about what your goals and your objectives are. I think that that is a huge red flag. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think so too. I think it goes back to who is the attention on, right? Like, who's the attention on? Because I've seen situations where clients have come in, they said, hey, or you've sold the pitch. Let's say your sales pitch is great, right? You onboard the client, and then 5 months or 3 months down the line, they're like, hey, we have this project, we're trying to raise capital or funding. And you didn't build that into your staffing, your labor plan. So now you're trying to put all this, they're like, hey, this is something that we've had in the works for a while. And so now the expectation is, hey, you're going to help support this as their accountant, even if it's for an additional fee. But because you didn't ask the question and you didn't take time to understand what are some of the short-term or long-term goals that they have, now you don't really know how to better support them. And then I think, Terrell, also going back to the point that you made about like being able to identify like what the customer's goals are. I think another important part of that is also being able to, I think it's kind of maybe not a shortcut, but I think it's a way for you to really assess, like that's how the client is going to measure you, right? Like, are you helping me achieve what I want? And so if you don't understand what their goals are, how, like, you're almost at a disadvantage of, once I do onboard them, like, do I really understand what they want? And am I achieving and meeting those goals? So you're going to be disappointing your clients and then eventually lose them. So that's kind of my perspective on that. But I'm curious to get your perspective specifically from I guess in having those conversations ahead of, for a potential client, like for example, for Lisa, like how would that better help like a potential accountant kind of be able to serve and kind of basically make a case for why they're a good fit for Lisa versus somebody else?
Well, to be honest with you, I think if you're an accountant and you're talking to a business owner, let's say
Mhm.
if I was sitting down and talking to Lisa, I don't know if I'm a good fit for Lisa if I don't know what she's trying to achieve. If I don't
That's
know where
true.
she's trying to go, then how can I confidently say, yes, we're the right firm for you?
Yeah,
And
that's
that's
true.
why I think that that's a really big red flag because, if you're the business owner, again, you're hiring someone who's going to play a role to help you get to your objectives and for you to get where you are going.
Yeah.
If they have no idea where you are going, how do you even know if they're going to be the right fit? Like, how do they know that they're going to be the right fit? Because there have been many times where, let's say, someone has called me and said, "Hey, what? Love what you guys are doing in the TL Turner group. We can be. I think we're the best marketing company to help you." And I'm like, how do you know? You don't even know what my goals are.
Exactly. And sometimes like the funny thing about some of those emails is they're so generic, or the email, like, even if I think about like multiple people have reached out to us about like hosting and like doing our podcast hosting and stuff like that. And they'll be like, yeah, I listened to the episode of this episode number 34, and this is what you said. And I'm like, that episode was a year ago. Like, or like that's even the wrong podcast. To where it's like, are you really taking time to understand your customer, like your potential customer? Are you taking time to understand what's important to them? Like, it would be so much more effective, like you said, Terrell, if like I understood, okay, do I, for me to be able to say, can I serve your business? Like, and it goes back to this, like, if I understand exactly what you're looking for, I can retarget my message to address that. Right.
Yeah.
If my company can do that, like if I can fulfill that, then I can say, okay, this is how I can do that. If you're looking to like raise funding in the next 5 to 6 months, hey, you know what, CFO services are probably a good idea for you. And then you can kind of manage and package that plan accordingly to say, okay, you know what, maybe we do it for the first year and then we downscale. Like, you don't know how to do that if you don't know what their goals are.
Yeah. I mean, and I think for, this one is where it does require a lot of integrity, I think, from the accountant. And you can kind of test, where they are because if they don't know where you're trying to take your business, they don't know if they can really support it. And then also, they don't know if they have the right staffing. And this is something common that I've seen happen with a lot of businesses where
Yeah.
they start, working with an accountant and the accountant gave them a really great price. Their business starts growing, and then the accountant it just starts complaining. Their work quality starts dropping, and then the accountant comes back to the business owner. Well, you're not paying us enough to support your business, and it's just like if you would have had a conversation up front and you understood that this business owner was trying to go through rapid growth,
Hmm.
then maybe you could have just set up a pricing arrangement that aligned with that, which
Yeah.
could have kept that relationship healthy. But I think for a lot of, accountants, they're just focused on, at every, accounting is the same for every business or bookkeeping is the same for every business. We'll just do the same thing that we did for other businesses. But when they don't spend the time to really, invest to get to know, I always say that is a red flag for a business owner because this person is not going to be in the best position to be vested in your success or your growth because they don't know where you're going. And
Right.
so, and I think one analogy that I would kind of compare it to is kind of, and I know the people listening didn't come for dating or marriage advice, but I mean, I think it becomes applicable. It's like, I always ask, I tell people like, when you come down to interviewing or let's say picking an accountant, this is a person who's going to have intimate access to what's going on in your business. Even though they may not have access to move money in your business, but they'll have access to see all of it. I
Right.
mean, they're going to see how much money you make. They're going to see how much your staff make. So this person is going to be intimately involved in your business and in your life. And so one of the questions I always ask is if you went up to a person, let's say if you were trying to date them, and on your first date, this person talked all about themselves, they talked bad about their ex,
Oof.
and they never really ask you any questions about what's important to you or what your goals are or what you like to do. And at the end of the day, would you say, you know what? This is a great person. We should go out again. And I'm like,
Absolutely not.
I'm like, when you think about it, that, or would you even say, you know what?
We
I'm
should be
gonna go home
friends.
and tell my parents, like, hey, I have found the one. This is the
Oh my
person I want to
God.
spend the rest of my life with. And it's
Right.
just like, you wouldn't. And I'm like, the same thing, although, like I said, a business relationship is not like, hey, till death do you part. I mean, you can fire your accountant, but it's just like, why even waste the time to start a relationship if
Yeah.
it starts off that, if the first date is that horrible, why even go any further?
Listen, and I think as you're talking and as you're saying that, one of the things that I was thinking about was the fact that I think of any, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here or if you disagree, but in my perspective, I think that accounting is probably one of the most sensitive areas of your business, to where if you mess it up, or if it's screwed up, if your financials are screwed up, it can affect so many things. Like, if your accountant reports the wrong revenue, it can affect how much you pay in taxes. And eventually, like, then the IRS comes after you. You don't want that. If they do, if the financials aren't correct, like, you can't get funding. There's just so many things that impact directly your life as a business owner. And so for me, I think it's even more serious. Like, you can hire, a bad marketing person and you don't get any results, and then you just fire them and you move on. But when you hire a bad accountant, it's almost like, from my perspective, like a snowball effect, to where it starts to affect other areas of your life. You don't know what your numbers look like, or your numbers are completely wrong. You file incorrect numbers, then you owe the IRS money. Now you have to get on a plane. Like, it's just, there's so many areas of your life that it can impact when you make that decision. And I think for that reason, I think it's just so important to make sure that you are really taking the time to assess these red flags. And I think, Terrell, you did such a good example. You provide such good context on that dating one, because I think it really makes it a reality. Because I don't think people really think through it. Like, if you went on a date with someone like this, like, would they, how, if, and they acted like this, would you move forward and even be interested in even maintaining a friendship with this person? But I'm curious to get your thoughts, though, on what I said about, like, the accounting part of your business having that snowball effect.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think when an accountant messes up in your business, that problem just it goes with you, because there have been many clients that have
Yeah.
come to our firm and we assess and we realize that, hey, it was a good fit, but we spent like the first 2 to 3 months doing cleanup of what the prior accountant did. And I will tell you, is cleanup work does get expensive. I mean,
Right.
because you're having to redo work that's already done. Like, you already paid the prior person, and you're having to pay us to clean up and go back and redo some of it, go back and find the problem, to where I think it is a situation where I would say it is worth the extra effort. And maybe you got to pay a little bit more money to find a good accountant versus a cheap accountant.
Yeah.
And I think it is worth the money to hire the right person or the right firm, as opposed to just, trying to get anybody, because not everybody can actually do a good job when it comes down to the bookkeeping, the accounting, or the CFO side of your business.
Agreed.
So now, number four is, now this one is a personal one for me. I know that there are several other accountants out there who would probably disagree, and that's fine. That's their opinion. But on this show, I'm going to share my opinion. And so, Lisa, my thoughts to you are, if your plans and your objectives are to continue growing your business, then I would say I would avoid working with solo operators. And when I say solo operators, what I mean is a person who's running a bookkeeping or an accounting firm, and it is just them. Like, they don't have a team or processes. Like, I would avoid those. And the reason why I say that is because I've seen many situations where there's someone whose their business is growing. They start working with a bookkeeper, and let's say that bookkeeper gets sick, or let's say they're sick for let's say a week and a half, They
Mm,
get zero support from that bookkeeper because that bookkeeper doesn't have any processes, or they don't have a team. They don't have a way to continue serving your business if something happens to them. I mean, I was working with one firm where their accountant had a stroke, and so that person has been recovering from that stroke for like a year now, and which that is a very serious thing, and
yeah.
rightfully so. The business owner is like, hey, I really want that person to get well and recover. I mean, that's what's very important, and that is great to say, and that is great to believe, and I think that is awesome. I want them to focus not on trying to get back to work, but I want them to focus on getting well and recovering from their stroke. But
Right.
also at the same time, you still have to get your accounting done.
Right.
So in that situation, they were working with someone who was a solo and they didn't have a backup plan. So now it's going to cost them an extra couple $1,000s to have to get that work redone because the person they were working with was a solo shop, didn't have any processes, didn't have a team. So that's why I would say if you're a growing business, I would say a red flag is working with someone who is just a solo shop with no processes and no team to support. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think it's a really good point. I think that continuity plan and the ability for work to still continue, I think is important. And I mean, this is no knock to like solo operators. It's just the reality of like as a growing business, you need that support and that active feedback. And if it's not there, or if there's a risk that it might not be there, then hey, that's just something to consider. But I think it's a really
Yeah.
good point.
Yeah, because I will say, even for like the accountants out there, I mean, like I get it because I was a solo at some point as well.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
but the reason why I say I wouldn't just say no if they're a solo. I would say they're no if they're a solo and they don't have processes
Yeah.
or a team. Because even when I was a solo, one of the things that we did is we really set up some processes. And so when it was time to, bring a new client on, I could explain to them, hey, here are the
Is what to
processes.
expect.
And
Yeah.
so the client knew that, hey, he actually has a methodology on how he's going about getting this stuff done. And it gave him some comfort because what the processes allowed for us to do is it set us up to start bringing on contractors and then eventually bringing on, full-time dedicated staff to where now we have, more dedicated staff to where we have two full-time employees and two part-time employees that are solely dedicated to supporting our clients. We have the processes in place to where if something happened to me, like if I went on vacation or let's say, I had to take some time off, their businesses would still be getting supported because we have processes and structure in place. And if you're a growing business, you definitely want that because I've seen too many situations where someone didn't have a team and it just turned out to be a huge problem for the business owner. And I'm like, that could have been avoided because that was a red flag in the beginning.
No, that's good. I think that's a really good point. And I'm not gonna feel some type of way that you said for employees because you forgot about the marketing team, but it's okay. You're talking about just the bookkeeper,
Well,
I
I
guess.
said the employees on the accounting side.
Oh, oh, okay. Just checking. It's okay. Next point. That's the next
Yes.
red flag.
No, but I do think this. I mean, I think what you bring up. I mean, you mentioned about like our marketing team. Like we do have a marketing team, and so this fifth one may be a controversial red flag, but I stand behind it
I actually
100%.
did
I
not
know.
agree with this one when I saw it, but then when you expanded on the point, I was like, all right, this kind of makes sense, but I'll let you go ahead.
So I will say is I've been in conversations with accounting firms like all over the country, and I'm just like, you know what, I still stand behind this one, and I know it's a little controversial, but I still stand behind it. Is I would say a red flag for a business owner, like if a business owner is trying to find an accountant, a red flag is if that accounting firm or that accountant does not have a public reputation. Now in that,
Stand on that, please.
I am not saying that they need to be an influencer and they need to have like 5 podcasts and they need to have, be known all around the world and be, 40 under 40 or 50 under
Not
50,
everybody
top
is a
100.
Terrell Turner, Terrell. That's why I wanted to be clear. Like not all accountants are Terrell Turner. Not all accountants can have 12,000 followers on LinkedIn and 40 under 40. And I'm just saying, like, that's why I initially did not agree with that point, because I didn't feel like it was a fair red flag. However, I will let you expand on some of the reasoning.
I get what you're saying, and I believe I agree. Not everyone has to have a bigger platform, and I don't even have the biggest platform. I mean, at some point, I had no platform, but
Yeah.
you do want there to be something out there to where if a potential client wants to evaluate, like, hey, the phone conversation went well, but what do I know about this person? Like,
Yeah.
what are other people saying about this person? Or like, hey, what has this person said about different topics, or how has this person helped other people? If you start to Google them, or let's say you ask for a website and they don't have a website, or you go and it's like you don't see anything about how they actually help people or people that they've helped in the past, then I would probably say that is a red flag. Now, I'm not saying that it means that, hey, you can't do business with them. But what I am saying is that means you're going to have to do a little bit more homework to really understand who they are. Because again, I go back to that dating example. You go out on the first date, anybody can put their best foot forward in,
That's true.
let's say an hour and a half, 2 hour date. Like
That's true.
anybody can show you the best. And honestly, if you're doing a sales call with an accounting firm, they're not going to be on the phone with you for like an hour and a half or 2 hours. It's probably going to be like a 15, maybe 30-minute call.
Mhm.
Anybody can show up great for that 30 minutes. You want to see what are they doing when they're not on that phone with me for 30 minutes? What does that look like? Even
Right.
if you go to their website and just even look at their About Me page, what do they say about their experience? Like, what has been their experience and stuff like that? I mean, and it's something that we're all very familiar with. And I know that, when you hear the term public reputation, people think like, oh, social media influence. What it really means is, what is this person's reputation? I mean,
Right.
it's kind of like, let's say I go back to the dating thing again, is if you were trying to date somebody, if nobody knew this person just showed up out of nowhere. They have no history. There's no trace of them. They don't have any friends. They don't have anybody that can vouch for them. I would say
That's a little
you
shady.
probably want to move forward with caution.
Yeah. No, I think that's a fair point. And I think the point that you made, I think a great way to do this, Lisa, practically is, like reviews, referrals, right? Like, hey, what do people say about you? And then to be fair, like I know like not all accountants are like us. We tend to be we're extroverts, we're out there, we're constantly putting out content. Like, so not all accountants are expected to be extroverts. I mean, I think even the stereotype is that accountants are not extroverts. But I do think that at least a way for you to validate that the person is who they say they are, right? So even like just making sure, hey, if you Google their name in CPA, make sure there's no scandalous articles about them. Make sure, that this person is still certified. Like if you look up their name and their license number, can you see if they're still certified? Are they in good standing with AICPA? Like those are practical ways that you can check that. We're not saying that, get an accountant who, or my view is not saying get an accountant who is on, 5 podcasts like us or has all the platforms. But I do think definitely there are ways to validate that the person is who they say they are. And I think even like just having a conversation with them where you ask a question, something to the tune of like, give them a problem or a pain point that you're working through on your business and just kind of see how they respond and how they manage it. Like, do they give you, like from an accounting standpoint, do they give you good insight? And I think this is something, Terrell, that you said actually that has stuck with me, that is really good information, where you said, are they willing to help you or give you valuable feedback without you paying for it in the beginning? So like, for example, one of the things that we do, like I remember there was a couple of weeks ago where you got in a sales call with someone and you were having a conversation with them and they were having a hiring problem and they were trying to figure out how to incentivize their employees. And literally on that call, like it's something we charge money for, but on that call you gave them feedback and you were just like, hey, if I was thinking about this, this is how I would walk through it, to where the person gets to see the immediate value of why they should hire you, but then they also get to understand, like, how do you think through things? Because if I'm going to be working with this person, and that's one of the things that we aim to do at the TL Turner Group. If I'm going to be working with this person, I need to make sure, like, when they're talking to me, I can actually follow through. I can follow through what they're saying. I understand what they're saying. They really simplify things and make it clear. And so really, that's another good way, Lisa, to ask is just the question of, hey, just walk. This is a problem I'm dealing with, and just see how they interact and see how they respond. Are they willing to help? Do they sound knowledgeable, like they know what they're talking about? Because I think that'll be a good way to kind of assess that.
Yeah, but I also think, you can ask for things like, ask for a reference. Like there was
Yeah.
a new client of ours that, we submitted our proposal. Their HR staff who does their hiring of like outsourced contractors asked for a referral. So I sent them 3 referrals of, clients that we work with. I even sent him the name of another accounting firm who also serves the same type of clients we do, but
Yeah.
that accounting firm has seen us present at a workshop for business owners. I'm like, hey, you can talk to a client we have, you can talk to a competitor of ours, you
Yeah.
can also talk to someone we've done some consulting with. So I gave them options to where if you talk to any of them, they're going to give you an honest perspective on us and the quality of our work, because
Right.
that's what you want to work with someone who's confident in what they do, but
Yeah.
that also has a reputation that other people can speak to. Because
Exactly.
I can tell you we're great all day long,
That's
but
true.
if no one else can actually back that up, or no one else is willing to actually say the same, you probably should not believe me as much if
Yeah.
you're going to be the one paying me. And I think
Agreed.
that's why I say that, the public reputation is very, very important. And also, another point to that is, because I know when I talk about this, some accountants and some accounting firms are like, well, I'm just not into like social media, not into like the public persona. I'm a private person and stuff like this. And one of the things that I always say is that that may be great for you, but in the reality of the world we live in today, if you're going to grow your accounting firm business, like there is a certain part of how you work that you do need to make a little bit more public. For example, people should be able to go to your website and understand, what do you do? Or they need to understand, like, who do you do it for? If the only way they find out is they have to invest the time to get on a phone call with you, to me, what it shows is either you are that good at what you do that you are in such high demand that, hey, you can, that's just how you operate your business because you're that good. But I'm just like, if you're not that good and you're not in that high demand, then what that also tells me is you're not willing to adjust and grow with the realities of how you run a business in the current environment. And if you aren't able to adjust in how you run your own business, that accountant is probably not going to be willing to adjust and help you as a business owner
Exactly.
adapt and run your business better. So I would say is your job is not to just find an accountant, it's to find someone who's really going to be an asset and help you move forward with your business, with your goals and your objectives. So that's why I say that's my 5th red flag. And I know other people may argue about it, but I'm sticking to it.
It's your 5th red flag, and you're sticking to it.
Yes. So just to give a quick recap, the
That's
5
good.
red flags. The first one is that, they spend more time talking about themselves and what their accomplishments. Number 2 is they talk bad about other firms and other businesses or other clients. Number 3 is they don't ask about your goals and your objectives. Number 4 is they are a solo and they have no processes or no team to really support the work that they're going to be doing for you. And then number 5 is that they do not have a public reputation that third parties can speak to. Now, those are my 5 red flags, Lisa, to where if you're interviewing and, for an accountant or bookkeeper or CFO, if you see any of these 5 things, I would say those are red flags. And I'm not saying that you have to say a definite no to them, but you should probably proceed with caution if you see any of those red flags. And one of the other things that I'll mention is, a lot of people ask this question. So we put together a checklist that people can use. And what they can do is the checklist lists out questions that you can ask the accountant that you're trying to interview, and they can kind of fill you in. So, Lola, anything you want to say about that?
I mean, I think the checklist is great because you can literally take it, pull it up, download it, and pull it up when you're having a conversation with the potential client and just go through the questions. They're very simple, but they're questions that are really going to help you kind of assess, like, is this person a good fit for me or not? Because we always want to make sure that you make an informed decision. So check out the link in the comments or in the copy of where the show is, and you can click on that and you be able to download that checklist.
Absolutely. And I would say it's been a checklist that's helped several businesses really pick a good accountant for their firm. And like some people use it when they're trying to hire a firm internally. And
Yep.
the reason why I share with a lot of businesses because I tell them we are not the TL Turner Group is not the right fit for every type of business. And
True.
so when we're talking to businesses and I'm hearing what their goals and their objectives are, and I'm like, we're not the right fit for that. But here's a checklist that will help you as you're interviewing other people to make sure that you find what works best for you. So that checklist is something we've shared with different clients, and it can be very helpful to help you find, someone who's a good fit for your business.
Right.
Now,
Agreed.
for the last part that I definitely want to talk about is the tax tea of the week. So, Lola, can you share with us what is this week's tax tea?
Listen, this week's tax tea is juicy. Okay. Ready for this week's tax tea. So, jumping into it, the tax tea of the week is a bookkeeper who stole over $800,000. I don't even know if a bookkeeper is the right word. Let me just say a woman who was doing bookkeeping who stole over 700,000, actually 807 to $800,000 from her employers. Okay. Just to recap this situation, Miss I forget her name at this point. I think it's let's just call her Kimberly. So Kimberly is going to be getting 9 years in prison. Okay? 9 years in prison for this offense. And I'm going to break it down, and when I break it down you'll understand why. But basically the story here is this individual I also want to preface by saying that she actually did this embezzlement and stole money at a prior company that doesn't even include these 2 companies that she stole money from. So I want to preface by saying that, and this happened in the 90s. It doesn't mention if she was convicted for that, but clearly not if she was still working. So this was in 1998 she did this. This case that where she's been convicted to 9 years in prison came out in 2022. So I don't know, maybe she went to prison, she got out and she did it again. You see, this is why it's important for somebody to have a public reputation, because why would you hire a bookkeeper to do your bookkeeping? Probably didn't do any research. I'm sure if they looked up her name, they would have realized relatively quickly that she was convicted of embezzlement. But I digress. So the story here is there are, in one circumstance and situation, she was hired by, I think the name of the company is M5. And she was hired by the company to manage the company. The company had like 5 to 6 Denny's, the stores, fast food chains, was managing those Denny stores. And she was responsible for payroll. She was responsible for issuing payment to vendors. And so basically what she was doing is she initially, and this is why I'm like, this is so shady. She would come in, she worked for a couple of years. She didn't start the embezzlement immediately. She kind of gained their trust and became a loyal employee. And then she was promoted up the ranks. And so while she was in the position, the leadership position, she would write checks to vendors, but she would create fake vendors. And basically what she was doing is she was paying that money to herself. And so she would create fake bills. she would create fake invoices, and then she would issue checks from the accounts to those fake clients or fake vendors, sorry, and then file with the corporate Denny's office for reimbursements for these vendor payments. So basically, she would create the expenses and then turn around and file for corporate to reimburse the expenses. And that's actually how she got found out, because she filed those expenses. And I think the Denny's corporate office did maybe some like investigations and found out that these vendors didn't exist. And then she got laid off from that job. So they fired her for that. So they fired her for that. Then she went to go work for another company. So I think like at this last company, she had stolen like maybe $300,000. And so at this next company, she went to the new company. I think it's like they gave company 3 was the name of the company because they didn't want to, I think disclose their name. But basically, company 3, she went to work for them. She started out as a bookkeeper, bad idea, and worked there, I think, for like maybe worked there for a year, and then she was promoted to general manager. So you know what I mean? Like she was doing her thing, developing trust. So she gets promoted to general manager, and that's when the fraud starts again, or the embezzlement starts again. So same situation, creating fake vendors, writing checks to herself. And so she's been finally caught. And so I think in 18 months, she stole $350,000 to $400,000 from this construction company.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so this is the story of Kimberly. It's very
Wow,
bad.
this is a crazy story. I mean, well, one is if the people who are hiring them listen to some of the red flags that we talked about, they would have probably avoided hiring this person.
Yeah.
And there's some additional red flags that I see in there. And I think one of them is, you know, if you are the person that is running a business, and this is something that I tell a lot of, all of our clients, is we run a spend by vendor report so they can see here is how much money we've been paying each of these vendors. And the reason why we run it is because we want them to be able to see, has somebody set up a fake account? Because if there's a vendor in there that you don't recognize and you're like,
Exactly.
hey, something looks off on this, you'll be able to catch stuff like this. So, I mean, I think the fact that wasn't being done was a mistake. I mean, that
Yeah.
was a red flag issue.
Yeah.
And then also I think, depending on the nature of like what her role was, I mean, there should be some limits on like how much
Exactly.
money a person can move between accounts, or there should be especially if you're talking about making large bank transfers, there should be some type of secondary approval on these payments. Like one person should not be allowed to create vendors and issue payments without somebody else having to
Hang up.
sign off on it.
Exactly. Yep. No, I agree. I think that was actually the red flag I noticed is she had too much control. Like you're the general manager. Like, okay, you should be able to maybe issue requests for vendor payments, but you shouldn't be able to write the checks. Like, I think those are some of the kind of like the checks and balances and the controls. Like someone should be validating that. Like, for example, even like if it was, hey, the owner had to sign those checks, right? Where it's like, okay, what is this check for? You have to explain what it is. But I think, sometimes I've noticed like, I think maybe because business owners who before they get an accountant, they're used to kind of doing everything from by themselves, whether it's, doing payroll and paying vendors and all these things. And so when they hand it over to someone like their bookkeeper, for example, they just assume, oh, well, everything I was doing, like, hey, go ahead and take responsibility for it. But like, no, that is not what it should be. You should not. And I think maybe this is also another red flag. If your accountant is asking you for full access to stuff, that's a problem, because especially now, because technology, bank accounts, a lot of bank accounts allow you, I know Chase for a fact allows you to add an accountant to your bank account. And this accountant has limited access. They can't make any transfers, all that stuff. They can just see transactions and be able to work what they need. And so I think that's another factor, is there really wasn't a checks and balances to make sure that she had control to only what she needed to do her job. And I think in some respects, there wasn't any oversight in basically validating this, because it makes no sense to me that the general manager of the company also has access to the financials and is doing the bookkeeping.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I would say, yeah, for this situation, I think the action item, for businesses to avoid finding themselves in this situation
Yeah.
is, I think, first is going back to the 5 red flags we shared. Number 5, what is the person's public reputation? Like,
Yeah.
if you do a background check, like this person, by the time they got to the third company
Yeah.
the last company where they got caught, they had already embezzled money from 2 other companies.
That's the other thing
So,
I was thinking, Terrell, like, if they had called to get a reference from her prior
yeah,
employer, and now, I mean, she could have very well made up and said, made up a company or just said she didn't work with this person, but whatever. If they had called and actually understood, like, okay, who was your former employer, they could have probably found out that this person was fired because she probably lied and was like, well, I left to pursue bigger opportunities.
yeah. I mean, I agree. I mean, and I will say, we're not HR experts or legal experts in like what questions you can or can't ask, but I do think doing some type of background check, especially if you're going to hire a person to be an employee within your company, you
Yeah.
want to do a full background check. If they're going to be a contractor, a third party, you
Yeah.
definitely want to do some type of, reference check, some type of reputation check. And the thing is, if you can't find anybody to say something good about this person and the quality of their work, they might not be the right person for you. And I think the other thing is, a lot of business owners don't know that when it comes down to having a bookkeeper, you don't need to give them unlimited access to your information. You can give them view only access to
Exactly.
where they can view the information that they need, they can update that. And then also, the third thing I think is that your bookkeeper, your accountant should be, providing you with some type of spend by vendor summary so you can see who have we been paying. You can quickly give that list a review to say, hey, is there anything in here that looks off? Or the same thing with employees, is making sure there aren't any fake employees set up in the system, just to make
Mhm.
sure that, hey, there isn't any funny business going on. So, wow, I would say is this tax tea is evidence as to why the red flags need to be paid attention
Exactly.
to.
Yeah, I thought it was a good one for that. So yeah, that wraps up our tax theme for the week.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. And thank you everyone for tuning in. I will say is, if you are an accountant, you can earn CPE for this. If you go over to the Earmark platform and you can listen to the episode and then you can answer a couple of questions and you can earn CPE credit for listening to the Stuff Your Accountant Isn't Telling You podcast. Until next time.